Well, thanks everyone for joining us. I am very happy to be here with my panel here at RSA. We have John Carlin, who's the Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Department of Justice. We have Dick Clarke, who is a former White House counterterrorism and cybersecurity advisor, who is now the chairman at Good Harbor Consulting. And we have Amit Yoran, who is the man of the hour running this cybersecurity carnival that we all know and love as president of RSA. So,
Carnival master.
Yes, there you go. So we only have 20 minutes, and so I would like to kick this off with something that everybody seems to want to talk about here at the RSA conference, and that is this very small disagreement that's going on right now between Apple and the FBI. You might have heard about something going on. So while we're all out here in San Francisco, today was actually a big day in Washington. Apple's lawyer and FBI director James Comey went to Congress to argue their sides. We're not going to break out the boxing gloves out here tonight, but I do want to ask a question that goes to the heart of this debate. So John, do you think that the country is safer if law enforcement can get access to this iPhone and other devices that are similarly protected?
I think you need to look at the particular facts and circumstances on any given instance. We're out here, as I have been before, preaching the value of encryption and the need for companies to safeguard their information and for customers. At the same time, we've long had a process where by applying to a court, you can get lawful court orders, and if you're able to effectuate them, that you can. And in this particular case, the stakes are high. It's the most serious terrorist attack since September 11th. 14 people lost their lives, 22 were wounded. The community is suffering and wants answers. And an important investigative step here would be to access the phone of what in this case is actually a customer of Apple's who wants their help and have asked Apple as their customer, because the phone belongs to the county, can you help us gain what's on the phone? And in this case, they can. And so that's why you'd hope they do it at the request of the customer, but if not, in order to get the answers for the investigation, we're going to use lawful process and see where we go with the next step.
And so this case is about one iPhone in particular, as you mentioned, but U.S. officials have said that they have other phones that they would like to unlock pending the outcome of this case. So Amit, let's throw it to you. Beyond this one case, what's at stake for the country's and consumer security if the U.S. can actually compel Apple to build new software that will override its own security features?
Yeah, I think John brings up a great point. You have to look at the specifics of this case, and we certainly need to do that. At the same time, we also have to realize that we are setting a precedent here. And whether it's the iPhone, this particular iPhone in this case, I know there's been another case recently in New York trying to get after another iPhone, but we're setting a very dangerous precedent where consumer and organizational trust in the technologies they use, in the security and privacy of the technologies they use, is at its core going to be in question. And while we may have a great reason and desire to access this information in this particular case, we can imagine that other governments and other jurisdictions may have their own reasons. And certainly the concern and the challenges that this would cause for human rights and our privacy as a society is something that we need to think about very carefully.
And so, Dick, what do you think? Do you think that the country will be safer if law enforcement can have access to secured devices?
Well, I look at this issue as someone who for 9 years was the chief counterterrorism officer of the United States and who went to bed every night hoping that he had done enough during the course of that day to prevent Americans from being killed by a terrorist attack. So I have enormous sympathy for people who are fighting terrorists, and I understand they want all the tools they can get. But I think we have to elevate this question to a matter of principle. And at the level of principle, we have already decided long ago, we're not going to let counterterrorism people have everything they want. We're not going to let them torture, at least not in this administration. We're not going to let them do a whole series of things that would make their life easier. Look, Jim Comey's job, the FBI's job, would be much easier if we all wore ankle bracelets and could be tracked at all times. His job would be much easier if he could listen to our conversations over our iPhones, have the mic on all the time, store all the data. So, yeah, I understand there are things we could do to make the FBI's job easier. The question is, where do we draw the limit? We don't want to have those ankle bracelets. We all agree on that. So where do you draw the limit? And for me, at least, having secure encryption end-to-end has greater national values than adding this incremental addition to the FBI. Moreover, I would say the FBI has a very long and well-established tradition of exaggerating its needs for things. And I'm sure in this case, they've greatly exaggerated their need for this phone.
John, do you want to respond to that?
I mean, I do think principles are important and the values in which we've lived by. And one of the key questions here is going to be, ultimately, for a long time now, our principle has been that we have a constitution that we live under, and that when you're able to obtain a court order using that constitution under the Fourth Amendment and a judge issues a search warrant, that it's appropriate to be able to effectuate that search warrant to find important evidence of crime
No, but
or
this isn't a
terrorism
search
event.
warrant. This isn't a search warrant. This is, under the All Writs Act, compelled speech. What you're trying to do with this order, which the judge in New York said yesterday was beyond the Constitution, is to compel people to do something, i.e. write code, which is speech. This isn't something you want to search. This is that you are trying to force American citizens to do something, i.e. write code, that they don't want to write.
So I think that, under some regime, the right place to place these important principled decisions would be in the hands of private corporations whose job is to make money for shareholders. That's their responsibility. There's others who would say the principle that we need to uphold is the one we've had in our Constitution, which is this should be something decided by the people's elected representative and the court system. And to say there isn't a search warrant involved, of course, is not true, because this was
You can search it all you want. You're trying to make somebody do something.
So, Amit, yes, would you like to jump in here?
Well, I'm just a little bit concerned that we're going and compelling Apple to do this. Are there not other investigative means? Is there not enough other data available for the FBI? Yes, we would love for it to be easier for them to go down this path. And outside of other information and data available, does not the government have the ability to break into an iPhone 5C that it owns and has possession of to gain access to the data? So again, the balance is, where is the onus on the government to do its work that's required to provide the information to the families and to the victims here, and what are we going to compel Apple, private company, to do?
It's very hard to believe that NSA couldn't do this.
I think that's great, but we have all these experts here, and if someone has a solution that does not involve going down the route...
The solution is
that
call
the
Fort
FBI
Meade and ask them
then-
to do it.
So Fort Meade, of course, and all the resources of the government have been consulted, and yet here we are. Now,
Yeah,
so there
because
is
you want to
another-
establish a precedent.
There is, that's, can I just, I want to just jump in there, because that is just 100% not true, and I greatly respect Dick Clarke.
You don't want to establish a precedent?
But this case, no, I'll say this right now.
You don't want to establish a
I'll
precedent?
say this right now, and we've said it earlier, if I may finish, which is there is a customer in this case. So if tomorrow Apple were to say, because the customer has asked for our assistance, we will provide it, there would be no legal precedent, we would drop the case. And that's
No, that would be your precedent.
let's
You would
pause
have a precedent that you would have compelled speech.
Well, if we can buy exploits for iOS out in the open market, and our National Security Agency doesn't have the ability to obtain the data on this phone, I think that's a greater concern of mine than this particular investigation. But
So how do we find a middle ground here? Because this question is not going to go away anytime soon, and if Apple is already apparently moving to build an even stronger device that even it can't crack in response to this court order, so that raises a whole interesting question about the future of this debate. I mean, is this going to go all the way to the Supreme Court, or can we find a compromise, even though there are clearly some very strong opinions here?
This should be decided by the Congress. If the Congress wants to create a law that says no American company can manufacture or distribute a fully encrypted device, then the Congress can pass that law. The interesting thing, if the Congress passes that law, is it will have no effect on any other country. And so you can still buy encryption without a backdoor in it, even after such a law. You can buy it in Italy, you can buy it in Germany, and it will come into the United States. So the law, even if it passes, will be feckless.
Okay, so we have one vote for Congress, sort of. Amit, what do you think?
Well, I think fundamentally, as Dick said, this will affect American corporations on an already suspicious world stage. This will not affect any terrorist, any foreign intelligence service in their ability to communicate effectively using very sophisticated cryptography. So I think we're really conflating this as a national security or counterterrorism issue. I think the reality of the case is that this is a law enforcement issue. And I think, and there's enough data out there that tells us, we live in a greater state of surveillance than has ever been available to law enforcement ever in the history of humankind in any society. So to now further weaken our privacy and protective measures available to those trying to defend our networks. Anoop said an interesting thing earlier. He said, we're all on the same team trying to defend our networks. And I actually would disagree with my esteemed colleague and good friend. I don't think we're all on the same team. I think we have a series of very significantly conflicting objectives here. The interest of law enforcement do not necessarily align with the interest of the intelligence community, and certainly neither of theirs necessarily align in many instances with the interest of those trying to defend our critical infrastructures and our networks. So it's a long-winded answer, but I think we're really encroaching on some very, very dangerous territory here.
So, John, do you agree that these two sides are not aligned, or do you think that we can find a compromise?
You hope. That's one reason we're out here, and I enjoy being in these dialogues. There'll be some who have strongly held views, but many who like to listen. And I know I like to hear the different views or approaches to the problem. I think it's legitimately complex, and we have to, at the one hand, do the best that we can to defend our country against cyber attacks through encryption, through the ingenuity that you have, and at the same time work if groups are exploiting that, like terrorist groups, to figure out if there's a solution. This whole world that we're living in is a social media-driven, internet-connected world. I mean, think about how new it is and how much we've changed in the last 5 to 10 years. Are we really right now at the last point in time, and 5 to 10 years from now we won't be facing it different? I don't think so. I think that with ingenuity in the room, if we share the same values of how can we ensure public safety and civil liberties in their broadest sense from both government over-intrusion and theft by nation states or terrorist acts, that we can come up with a better system than we're in right now.
And so you brought up social media, and I do want to bring this up because this is another example where there is debate over public versus private sector responsibility. So law enforcement is saying that it's now seeing terrorists use American social media platforms to get their message out, to recruit and to radicalize. So John, what do you think that companies should do on this front? What's the threat look like, and does the tech industry need to do more to fight extremism within their platforms?
So the threat we're facing now is a new iteration of the terrorist threat. It's resulted in the United States mainly because of the use of social media in investigations right now in all 50 states, prosecutions in 30 states, more use of the criminal system against terrorism last year than at any time since 9/11. That's not a good place to be, and so we need to figure out what are the commonalities. And what we're seeing in almost every case, social media, and linked to that, the age of the defendants. Over half are 25 or under, 1/3 are 21 or under. So one reason we've been out here, and I've been very happy with the reception we've received, is to try to explain what we're seeing and then unleash some of the creativity both in Silicon Valley. Last week we convened a meeting with Silicon Valley, Madison Avenue, Hollywood companies. We were the conveners, but the message was really, here's the problem we're facing. Are the ways you can think of outside of us, on your own, that could keep these terrorists from overseas from recruiting our youth here at home?
So you think that the tech industry should step it up, but Dick, as a former counterterrorism official, what do you think about the government's responsibility in this? Because there are some who say that law enforcement might actually be happy to have such a vast amount of material that's open source to comb through. What's your take?
It should be up to law enforcement and the intelligence community to decide when it wants something left up on social media for intelligence collection purposes. Look, there's a law today that if you have kiddie porn on your site, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, you have a legal obligation to report that and to take it down. I think that same legal obligation ought to be extended by law to terrorist postings that incite violence. There isn't that law yet. There should be.
So, Amit, to what extent do you think that tech companies should be responsible, and even are they equipped to fight extremism within their own platforms?
Well, I think as long as it's very carefully and very narrowly defined, there's certainly a case to be made there. I think if we leave it too broad and too much room for interpretation, we would then be asking the tech community to do something that is very outside of not only their comfort zone, but their area of expertise. I mean, extremism, how is that going to be defined, and how are you going to search? I mean, think about the amount of data that goes through YouTube on video. Think about the information on Facebook and each one of these communications infrastructures. How are we expecting them to be able to automate the search for this?
I agree with that in principle, but the fact is they do it today. The fact is that Facebook and Twitter and all these other things today do look for terrorist postings and do take it down. They just don't feel any obligation when they do that to report it.
Right. Well, so glad we found some areas where we agree on things. And I would like to kick it open to audience questions. We have a few minutes, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and say, David, right in front of you. Turn around. There you go. Please say your name and where you're from as well.
Hi, I'm Charisse. I'm from Austin, Texas. And so here's the question for you guys. If we don't get a resolution to this issue in an amicable way, what happens if we get CALIA all the way down on the endpoints? And CALIA is the Telecoms Act that requires you to have reversible access under a search warrant. Did you hear that?
Sorry. Yeah, maybe could you...
You want me to repeat it? I'm louder without the mic.
There you go.
That's good.
Yes.
Right, Amy.
So, the question.
Okay. The question is, if you don't resolve this amicably and Congress acts reactively, what happens if we end up with CALIA on the endpoints? Civil liberties versus law enforcement. Go.
What happens if Congress acts?
CALIA
Yes.
for the.
Does anyone want to take that?
Well, first of all, Congress doesn't pass laws anymore, so it's not much of a risk. If Congress had the opportunity to pass a law extending the CALIA obligations of telephone companies to internet companies and to internet device manufacturers, which is what this is, that would be a really, really bad outcome. And I don't think there's much chance of it happening, but you never know.
Great. Okay. Anyone else have a question? If you could raise your hand, we'll come to you with a microphone. Anybody? Question? Yes, over here in the front.
Hi, how are you? So, Apple's an interesting case, and I think, what about the case of like peer-to-peer technologies that are unbreakable? Should we just stop developing those? This is directed towards DOJ, of course.
Did you guys catch the question?
I didn't.
So Apple is an interesting case. What about peer-to-peer technologies? Should people stop developing them?
Peer-to-peer unbreakable technology.
Peer-to-peer end-to-end. I think the answer, I'll take the first shot at that. I think the answer is absolutely not. It's critical that these technologies exist for communications so that information which is intended to be private can remain private. There's incredible societal value to this. Everything from e-commerce and trust in the infrastructure and communications on down. And while those companies do exist and are thriving here domestically in the US, there are scores of these companies and communications methods in all sorts of jurisdictions overseas, in numerous countries around the world. So think that we're not really denying any capability to our adversary or to a threat actor. We're simply denying the value and benefit of these technologies and capabilities to our own society.
I have one last short question for each of you. So in a lightning round, I guess, if you will, John, what is one thing that you would like to see U.S. companies do to better help the country fight off hackers? One thing.
Report breaches.
Great, that's true. And Dick, what would you like to see the U.S. government do to better fight off cyber threats?
I'd like to see it set up a cyber defense agency and resource it properly and put someone in charge of it who had real statutory authority rather than dispersing the authority throughout government.
Okay. And Amit, I guess a slightly different question. What is one thing that the U.S. government can do to either help increase or even win back the trust of companies to work together on fighting against hackers?
I think the answer lays in what John just said, and it is transparency. We need, for this broken market, and we are a failed industry, to succeed, to achieve a better market equilibrium, we need to have much better transparency from the private sector, perhaps even compelled by the government, to have breach notification, not just for silly PII and credit card data, but for all breaches, for intellectual property. And in doing so, we'll know much more about the threat, about the pervasiveness of the loss, about the sort of catastrophic nature of the failure, and that will also spur increased action. So I think there's a responsibility on the government's part to encourage the marketplace with greater transparency to achieve a better equilibrium.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we have our next panel up now.